take notes, and so because I think we're missing Leo. So. Let's see who else we can. Is there anybody else from over here? Whom we can note taking?
Yeah, I already asked Gong Peng to take
Here, basically, this was basically the slide that I did, so I can show from this. And I was also saying, right, so I, for example, wouldn't ask for adoption of the two graphs that I've done because, this is author overloaded. I mean, we can remove that, but I'm going to say this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, remove that for now.
But I was going to say it, right, because that was the point.
What's your time? Oh,
51. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Hello. Where? Anyone? So that's the agenda. Where is it? That's no.
It's fine. I'll do it.
Hi. It's time 5:30. 50. Actually, it's time to start. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We have been in this ridiculous name, which split the room into two and has a very big claim. What? Oh.
Attention.
You got better? Okay. Thanks, everyone. This is the Anima working group. If you have been in the wrong room, you still have time to get out to the most ridiculous meeting room we ever see. It has two separate rooms with very big column inside. Anyway, here we are. We have 2 hours, how to page down? Yeah. This is a note wheel. Everybody should already see that so many times during the week and the meeting before. So everybody should read that carefully and obey those rules. I'm not going to read that through here. How can we do page down?
I think it should be just shift or control. One of them.
Okay. Okay. So, as normal, we would like to mention to everyone the mailing list is one of the official working place, so people should have the online discussing, particularly during the between those meetings. So the face-to-face meeting here is only discuss those questions raised in the mailing list and make more people aware of them and try to seal down the conclusions and more. Information could be found in the list at the web page. This is the meeting agenda for today. We have the working group dash, and then that's the working group document update. We actually have 3 working group document updating today, but I actually moved 2 of them into the Bresky subsession. So there's just one autonomic control plan for 10 minutes. Then that's the potential new charter on scrubbing. We push 30 minutes there. Hope that's not enough. Then that's the information distribution in autonomic networking. it's individual draft, but we think that's actually in the scope for the current charter and also for the proposed new charter. So it's in a little bit priority. Next is the meeting agenda for the sub-session of Brisky. We have 7 drafts there. 2 of them are currently working group draft. Obviously, what we would like to is to have the priority for the working group documents. They can go as long as they want, and also we would like to the working group to get more review on this document and to try to finish that as soon as we could. Then at the end, we have one scenario and requirements for layer 2 autonomic control plans, an individual draft. Because we are in the process of recharter, so we're giving little time for the individual draft for this meeting. But if we successfully get our recharter done before the next meeting, we could have more time for a new draft, new individual draft, and it's possible we have 2 sessions for next meeting. Any issues for the agenda? Agenda Bash?
So we had our AD tell us that get closer. Yeah. That one of the issues that have been brought forward to him was the. Do you want to maybe talk to it yourself? Yes.
Yes, Ignas Bogdanas. So first thing, not issues. Just to give the context, over the last year, I have had approached by 4 people saying that both co-chairs of Anima have the same affiliation. And while I don't necessarily see this as a problem, and this is not something unique, we had such cases, and we actually have such cases too. What I would like to do is to ask the working group whether they see this as something troubling, and if yes, what should be done by that. I'm simply relaying the feedback from the community that they noticed this and they ask such a question. So just to be very clear, this is not an escalation from AD saying that something is not right. This is providing the feedback from the community that I got. So if you could discuss that, and I think the whole working group could discuss that, would be good. If you have something to say, for example, right now, come to the mic, call it open mic very briefly, and state your opinion.
Hi, Elliot, responding to Ignas's point. I did notice that both chairs have the same affiliation. I have not noticed that this has been a problem. And I would raise the issue if I thought it was a problem. And at the moment, I don't see it. And until I do see it, for me, it's not a problem.
Laurent Chavalia, I also noticed the change in affiliation, but it was more than a year ago, something like this. But I've not seen any issues so far in how the working group chairs have been managing the group or the document. So far for me, it's not an issue.
Anyone else has anything to say? Obvious. Right, so can we do like this, let's keep this window, say, open for a week or 2 weeks after the meeting, and if you have anything, send out to the mailing list. But the message that I'm getting that this is not a problem for the working group at this time. I think that will be just silently closed and that's it. Not a working group, I mean, the issue.
And by the way, I think we also skipped about the always nasty piece of the notes taker, right? So I think we already had one friendly.
Yeah, Guangpeng said he will do it. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Again.
You're trying to notice the out key.
Out key. Yeah. Okay. Just give you the very brief summary of what we had. The working group, we had 2 RFC already published last year in May, and we actually should have more because we have 3 documents already passed the ISG process. One actually in 2 years ago, and actually 2 in 2017 and 1 in last November, the reference model. They're all ready, but blocked by Ms. Rife. So whenever the SAP gets through, we will have those 4 RFCs together. So that's actually giving our, most headache focus now is the SAP. So we would, it's submit to ISG for publication early last year, but still with the ISG, we have 3 discuss and given the most latest information I got from others, we should be able to do that in 1 or 2 months. All righty.
Ignas Bogdanas. So this is what I was going to ask. Of course, both the responsible AD and one of the ADs holding the discuss will change this week. I think it's already too late to try to do anything here, but basically what is your plan of addressing that? The responsible AD is still the question. I mean, historically that has been on the terrorist side. Maybe it will happen. We had a brief discussion with Eric. Maybe that document will come to me, which would be probably more logical, but I think that doesn't change the discuss holder problem as one of the security ADs is changing.
Right. So from the understanding, having talked to other folks, Eric is leaving, and so I can show the changes done to resolve the discuss, and that there was done against the review from Eric and from Benjamin. And so our expectation was that hopefully Benjamin would take care of reviewing both of these feedbacks, because there were also, a lot of the discuss were overlapping. The third one from Alicia actually and Gen Art, I think, was already resolved last time. I just didn't try to ping Alicia to say clear the discuss, because I first wanted to work on the big chunk, which was the security one.
Okay.
So and if basically Benjamin is too overloaded, I mean, he does a lot of things, then we'll need to find another reviewer. So otherwise, I think he could maybe take care of also Eric's. Because he's kind of, he spent a really large and good amount of time in reviewing that stuff also. I think
right. If you're asking me right now, I don't have what to answer. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying more from administrative position, what's the situation with that. But if you say that the discussion with Benjamin is ongoing, I think that is fine.
Yeah. So I think Benjamin said that obviously after ITF he can come back and review the -19, and I think at that point in time we can check if we need to get somebody else involved or if he can take care of Eric's feedback as well.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm not just saying it from the perspective of I think he would be the best person of already having delved into the matter and having all the discusses. If there is some, ISG process that says somebody else needs to do it, then that's...
No, simply discuss needs to be cleared by the AD raising the discuss. Once the AD changes, it's the new AD which inherits that. Well, inherits the whole document, and he has to go through. Naturally, he probably doesn't understand the whole context and other things. That will just delay things, and that's it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So shall we go to the slides? Was anything else in the...
I can go. Yeah, we can go to the slide. Yeah.
Ignas Bogdanas again, and while you had the previous slide on the actual Brewski. Sure. So I've been looking into the comments which are coming in as a resolution mostly for the IoT Directorate, and I believe that addresses most of the concerns. And in the current state of waiting for AD write-up, I would say that once you feel that you are happy with those comments, as the changes which we went into the document are substantial, we'll need to do an ITF last call for that document once again.
Okay.
And once that is done, it will progress.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So that brings us to the No. I hate this. How can
Should I?
close down this?
Thank you. What? So we.
And I think
I think, yeah, this is the right key. Show meeting material and
then
yeah.
go ahead to do the presentation.
Information. Where's the ACP? I uploaded it. Huh. Didn't take. Crazy. Where is the ACP slides?
I don't know.
I uploaded them. Waiting for data tracker. Waiting.
You should have that slide earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, you can use your name.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That works.
Yeah. So full screen again.
Okay. Oh, you can do that. Right.
Sure. I think it scrolls perfectly. Okay, so this is the update of the ACP draft. So we had dash 18 primarily doing the review of Genard and Alicia, and a few other outstanding feedback comments in IETF 103. So this time the version 19 was published before IETF 104, doing the feedback for the very extensive IESG security review from Eric Rescoller and Benjamin Kaduk. We think that that version addresses all the outstanding IESG review comments, and they don't introduce any functional changes to the ACP, but they're really just a lot of, answering to questions, explanations, and refining of the mandatory IPsec and DTLS profiles. So the details of, what you need to do in IPsec and DTLS to ensure interoperability. So, right, so many textual sentencing improvements. So the first interesting architectural aspect that people couldn't understand without me adding more text was that, the support for constraint devices opportunistic in this document. This text is in there. So we do include DTLS as an alternative secure channel protocol to IPsec, primarily for the perspective of explaining the ACP architecture and the negotiation and the ability to support different protocols. But that is not complete support for constraint devices, out of which one class would be characterized by only supporting, any protocol other than TCP, right? So devices that hate TCP for whatever reason, too much code space, history. So we still have dependencies against TCP in some of the components. For example, EST for certificate renewal, which we mandate to be supported, would have to be defined over UDP or CoAP. Likewise, the grasp in the ACP, we're also doing across TCP right now. So we think this would be better work for a follow-up document to really then focus on the constraint devices completely. So, yeah, there were, so these are just a bunch of details. So one of the important part was how ACP can also help secure bootstrap. That was, I think, not well written. So, the security aspect that the ACP brings to Bootstrap was primarily also meant to existing non-Brewski Bootstrap, because Brewski itself is secure, but the hop-by-hop encryption also hides the communication patterns, like, the addresses of the communicating entities. So that's another level of security that end-to-end encryption, even in secure Bootstrap, cannot provide by itself. And then we have this section 4, which kind of, was very confusing with the musts and should it had in there. And in 103, I had a special form of _must_should to highlight that this is actually a stub that was done to emphasize the requirements that the working group came up against an ACP in the beginning when we started the Anima working group, but we weren't allowed to have from the charter separate requirements documents because everybody was afraid we would kind of waste too much time on requirements documents. So this basically, the requirements are actually lower specified in that section than, for example, what the ACP ultimately does, right? So basically says you should really have encryption, and ultimately the ACP, as we do it now, says you must have encryption, and that basically was confusing. So hopefully now we'll get to the end of having as much explanation and correct formalism in there. So these are not capital must anymore because this is just informative going into the document. Likewise, explanation for the RFC 8222 field. And that was pretty much, we choose that encoding also because we're a little bit afraid of raising requirements against low-end devices to support additional ASN1 decoding of previously undefined ASN1 fields. So that was one of the reasons why we chose this, textual encoding into an RFC 8822 field. So security review, obviously, so got a lot of good feedback to help revisit the text to be more specific about the ACP domain membership check. So one of the things is that obviously we want to do certificate path validation, which means you can have a master CA, sub CA, assigning CA, so you can have chain of CAs that will be checked. Then also the problem that because this is bringing up connectivity, first by itself, you may not be able to have, certificate revocation list or an OCSP server connectivity initially. So that those were details added how to deal with that, which basically means, if you don't have the information, you first build the connectivity, but if you actually figure out later that the only connection you have to the internet or to the rest of the ACP is through a device that you learn, has a revoked certificate, well then goodbye your network connectivity through the ACP. Rather be secure than have connectivity in that case. Then basically Brewski is mentioned in a lot of places now as kind of really the preferred example on how to do the secure bootstrap, and obviously ANI devices must have Brewski, but if you just want to implement ACP with any other form of bootstrap, that's fine as well. But the reviewers were mentioning that all the Brewski details are fairly dense and you must read Brewski, so that's what the text now says. If you're interested in using ACP with Brewski, read the following section, otherwise skip it. And please, I'm going quickly through this, so please raise your hand or make yourself, known if you don't understand anything, want to understand anything better. Right, so then also the trust points and trust anchors. So I was trying to summarize, I think hopefully a good one-page explanation of what they mean, what the terminology is, because there were 2 or 3 points that I had to add in response to the feedback, and I think that, anybody who is not a security AD might even be more overwhelmed by the security aspects that the ACP introduces. So this is hopefully one good additional page of explanations. MACsec, so we only mentioned this as an example, so there is nothing about MACsec in the document at all. That was clarified. Then the whole way on how 2 nodes discover each other and assign the roles of Alice and Bob in the setup of the secure channel. That was also just dense text, and now there is a 1-page long step-by-step diagram with each individual message being explained and related to each other. Why? Okay, you do this message because you had the following message in the prior step. So that was also asked for. So now the real functional refinements, and if there is still anything missing of all these hundreds of parameters in IPsec, I very much welcome anybody who knows that formalisms better to suggest additional text. But what it now says is ESP with AES 256 GCM as used in RFC 4106. I was asking around a little bit, and it seems that this Galois counter mode is well enough supported in the hardware that we would like to support with IPsec, and in many cases might even have a higher performance and work better than the prior modes. Key establishment must support ECDHE with P256. Don't even ask me anymore. I don't remember anymore what this means. I was looking through all that IPsec stuff, finding reference, and hope that's the right text. DTLS actually was easier because Eric had pointed me last year to RFC 7525, which is a very good description of recommended DTLS profile. And the only change we really did was to say that we don't really care about supporting interoperability with DTLS 1.1. So raise the bar to say must use DTLS 1.2 or later. Right, and then also the other text about, there is no mandatory to implement secure channel protocol. It really only depends on what type of role you have in the network. So we're specifying the general purpose. One particular class of ACP router, general purpose router, must do IPsec. But if you're saying, yeah, well, I'm just an IoT ACP router, then you might only implement DTLS, and it's not a problem because this is not about end-to-end connectivity where everybody needs to have a common MTI, but this is just hop by hop. So across your backbone, you're just running, for example, ACP with IPsec. Then you have a gateway node that does IPsec and DTLS, and then in your IoT edge, you're only using DTLS. So hopefully this is now sufficiently well explained that nobody stumbles across this anymore. Right, so a couple of, I think, the ACP registrars text, I think we're already running short on time. So, so the RIPL text that Pascal and I put together, on second reading, the introduction section was very technical. So after you've gone to RIPL University, you would understand it. So I tried to rewrite it that it basically is more logical and explanatory for people to whom RIPL is new, which I think was the case for the security reviewers. Then, of course, also added the precise sentence about the benefit over the IGP, which effectively is there are a lot fewer routes, especially when you get to the edge of the network, right? And of course, yes, we don't use RIPL security as it's specified because we instead have the ACP secure channels underneath it. ACP STP interactions, benefits. Right, so self-healing. So this was basically specifically adding to the benefit section the fact that we're actually raising the bar on maintaining actual, authentication of the secure channels because they're long-lived, and they may be as long-lived as that they may be the credential of the other side may be revoked or expired in the meantime, and at that point in time the requirements against the ACP in the normative section already said you must revisit that and tear down the connection if that happens. So then operations, right, we're saying what ACP could be used for, and then basically I got the please add the 20 RFCs for all these normative documents for all these protocols. Okay, that was fun. Then basically the whole question of what configuration does the ACP need, because it does seem to, have a lot of configurable aspects in it. And basically I wrote a, in this 10.4, which is operational, which is information, which is not specification part, really trying to highlight the fact, only no ACP configuration is good ACP configuration. So everything that is configuration is the exception, and basically those are the things that we haven't figured out so far how to make magically auto-configuring, right? So that's basically the bootstrap config, which with Brewski can be very simple. The CA certificate server, EST servers, ACP connect to connect non-ACP nodes, and then if you're in a brownfield environment, well, you need some magic command which already has good documentation to enable the ACP or to build ACP tunnels, right? So, I mean, these are really, from our perspective, exceptions, and, we've, with pre-standard implementation, we've built networks where, that was very, very simple. Security considerations, of course, that was also in the details in terms of that we're claiming that there is no configuration needed for the ACP, which is also one of the reasons why I detailed all these kind of exception cases up front in the prior section. And we reworded the initial paragraph to highlight that obviously, you have this bootstrap, however you do it, but once you have an ACP domain certificate and you don't need the stuff, well, it is fully self-operating. Then, of course, also the highlight, the ACP registrars are really critical infrastructure, and they need to be hardened similarly to how you need to harden a certificate authority, right? So if you attack the CAs, you can take over the network, right? So the registrars or the CAs, you can take over the network. right? And then, I was trying to detail that peer-to-peer security model that we have, peer-to-peer, because really with the domain certificates, you can just connect, however many or few ACP nodes with each other without dependency on any, NOC backend or other stuff. So you can use that in ad hoc networks, however you like it. That's why we chose the peer-to-peer group security, and then also discussed that the certificate can be reused in higher levels for end-to-end security. But in those uses, you very often would rather like to have, more role differentiation. Not every node should have the same authorization in other nodes, and that already exists in section A10.5, so there's just a pointer from the security section to that one. And the expiry during channel lifetimes, we already had that. So, IANA consideration, so this whole, why we chose the name serve.xxx was strange, so hopefully that's better explained now. There was basically the discussion in the security review, how about compromised ACP nodes? And, well, Appendix A means this is all kind of the, text on the fringes anyhow. But after reviewing what the problem really is, and we've seen that in the practical deployments as well, is the compromised ACP nodes, right? The main issue is credential leakage, right? So, for example, passwords for administrator access getting to somebody else, and the ACP already has some good amount of protection against the operator doing something bad, because even such an attacker will have a very hard time, shouldn't be able at all to bring down the ACP. So even if an attacker is trying to take over your node, well, if you don't have too many, CLIs for the ACP, and the ACP is continuously running, he can't even connect you from the network. And other parts like, you shouldn't have, local CLI to establish operator credentials anyhow. So that was kind of my perspective on what really, from my experience, the most important steps are you can take in implementations to create devices where the impact of compromised nodes are minimized, or the chance to even have nodes compromised is minimized. So, yep, that was it. So, hopefully a lot of useful explanatory text added. Eric.
Eric Nordmark. So I saw that you said there's issues dealing with CRL and OCSP servers not being reachable, but you control the other end of this communication, right? So you could mandate OCSP stapling and be done with it.
That's true, but if that node is attacked and compromised, it may not do this anymore.
What do you mean not do it? If you don't get a staple, you say, I'm not going to talk to you. If the staple is bad, I'm not going to talk to you. Because
right, but I think one of the points is also that, as I said later in the slide deck, that we want to support the case where you don't have your NOC backend with all these big servers running, right? So if you basically just connect 3 or 4 ACP nodes together, right, at that point in time, none of them may have OCSP or a CRL.
Well, but they would have certificates.
Right. Exactly.
And they have connectivity to the OCSP server that can vouch for that certificate.
No, I'm saying
they're in a complete island where they can't talk to anything else.
For example,
so you don't know what time it is either because you don't have NTP or anything.
No. I mean, if I look at typical deployments that we had, like let's say a site in an enterprise that is losing its internet link, and all the big servers are basically behind that internet link, right? You still have locally in the site the ACP running, right?
But is this only an issue when you onboard new devices?
No, it has nothing to do with onboarding. ACP is not about onboarding.
So, okay, you painted yourself into the corner, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any better ideas on how we can deal with that, right? I mean, the whole point is trying to find the right weight, the right balance between security and connectivity, right? And that's what the text is trying to do.
Yeah, and it's sort of like initial thing that all I have is a thin straw to drink through, right? Being able to see how can you leverage that stuff.
The bootstrap. This is a perfectly running network, but basically it's too expensive, too cumbersome to basically put CRL, OCSP server in each of the 500, remote branches that you have in an enterprise. But you have basically, in them 20 or 30 switches that basically are hopefully in the future becoming more and more autonomic.
Right. No, hang on. Mm-hmm. If you're doing CRLs or So you end up falling back to not providing any security from OCSP or CRLs, because you're saying that if I can't connect to the internet, I can't talk to that OCSP or CRL server.
That's one case.
I'm going to run it in insecure mode, right?
No.
Because I can't check the validity of the certificates.
Well, all I'm saying, well, maybe
Right.
another way. There is also text already that is basically pointing to the fact that one way to introduce security in these environments is to work with short-lived certificates, right? So that basically you use simply the certificate expiry as one of your base security mechanisms.
Well, sure, but my point is that stapling doesn't change any of this. It just makes your thin straw be more useful, because you don't have to worry about, I can reach the server, but I can't reach the CRL or OCSP. And you can have the same policy choices saying, if I don't get an OCSP response that's stapled, what is my policy of how to operate in that case? Because it could be that end, that's a local guy inside your enterprise, he couldn't talk to the server anyhow. And that removes you as the person who might have very limited connectivity from trying to deal with that complexity. Right. So I think that you're not removing any policy choices, you're just making it simpler.
Well, so let's say this, right? So I mean, the solution for the ACP was also done a lot in conjunction with the Brusky authors. Unfortunately, some of them are not here today. And one of the consideration was to basically keep the solution simple. And there was kind of the operational experience that OCSP and CRLs do make operations, let's say, for example, more complex than short-lived certificates. And from that came kind of the conclusion that maybe what we try to do in this, first version of the ACP is to try to come up with a good, reasonable minimum subset. Now, if you want to have a policy for stapling, I think that's fine, right? We have ways in the certificate to add extensions, and given how this policy is something which I think should be carried through the certificate, so otherwise we have no way to provision. Maybe that would be a good, very simple 2 or 3 page modification, right? That basically we're saying certificates with a particular extension, they mandate the following, for people who like CRL or OCSP. I just, I had a lot of fight, for any option that I introduced. So I'm trying at this point
I wasn't involved.
Go down in the, not add any more options at this point.
No, I'm trying to figure out if you could reduce some things by making it simpler. I don't understand how short-lived works when you disconnect it either, because I can't get a new certificate, right?
Yes.
If it expires during the night, and whatever the time span is, a month, and then how do I deal with having lack of connectivity when it expires?
Kent Watson. So first, I think, I'm not sure if you remember, but in the voucher itself, there's a leaf, I think it's called revocation checks required, which is to say it's an opportunity for the policy to be specified whether or not CRL or OSP is mandatory, critical. So I think we already have the hook in place in the voucher.
If Bruce is used,
Yeah. And then my second response to the Peter's comment is that the short-lived voucher, if it expires in the middle of the night, I think the intent is that the voucher is actually ephemeral, and that it's only being used to do the initial bootstrap, and once the bootstrap's been completed, it's unnecessary. Okay, never mind.
Michael Richardson here. So yeah, we had a lot of discussion about whether or not we would include CRLs in the voucher process, and we made the vouchers very short in response to that, because if you're not at all online and you have these other problems, well then just it doesn't work anyway. As for the ACP, so and keeping whether or not you're going to have connectivity if your short vouchers expire, that's an issue. And it's an issue whether you have CRLs, OCSP, or whatever, okay? So if parts of your network are falling asleep or whatever, such that you can't do this, then that's an issue. And I think that is essentially all controllable by the certificates that the registrar issues. If it issues them with I can't say those words, OCSP, thank you. Stapling instructions, then that's what will happen. If it issues it with CRL points, then that's what you'll do. There's lots of IPsec implementations, on the other hand, that kind of just go, that's too hard. So be it, right? There's quality of implementation issues and there's other things, but mostly what I would like to see is I'd like to see if you have an island network that has no time. It could have time from GPS or something with no internet connectivity. It could have time because the power hasn't gone off and it trusts its RTC. Just, the fiber was cut. Backhaul event, earthquake, I don't know, earthquake not in your location, somewhere else. Then the hope is that if you had, unless you believe the certificate is bad, even though it expired, you might still use it anyway. And if the rest of the network is convinced your certificate is bad, then they won't talk to you anyway. So I think that in many cases, operationally, we're going to have an experience. I think that operators are going to say, I would prefer a little bit of insecurity to having to send a person on an airplane to reset that piece of equipment. But at least with Brewski, it would be someone who just knows how to push the button, not someone who knows how to reconfigure it.
Right. I mean, if any of you, I would really encourage you to read these sections where this is done, and the diff between 18 and 19 should show you those places easier. And if you have any specific text you'd like to suggest as something you really feel strong about doing now, please, send that to me on the list. Otherwise, as I said, I think it's easy to add more policy options through the certificate details, or just describing the ones that already exist, as Michael said, and hopefully, then, because I just really can't see that one option fits all, and I think at this point in time, if we start documenting even more options, I think we'll never end here.
Okay. I have to report we are 25 minutes later, but that's fine, because as we said, this is the one we give the priority for the working group to complete it. So we would like to give you enough time to discuss that. The next will be the potential new charter on Scrabble. We actually did start to write up the proposed charter around last summer and circled on the working group list. We had one feedback received from our AD Eagles, worked into the official 0102 version before the IETF in Thailand. So it was found to be too dense and detailed. However, it showed the background to the proposed shortened charter. From last meeting, we actually done 4 rounds of refining, and that including 2 rounds of the AD feedback. So we uploaded the version to the Anima working group data Twitter February 3rd. And actually, since then, we make 2 more rounds of refine. So now we have the latest version 0.5. Actually, it has categorized the work items into 5 classes. That done just 2 weeks ago. And for all the time, we have all those text open in the wiki, so that's can be seen by everybody, and we have hopefully sufficient discussion in the minutes and in last meeting. Here is the current charter, current proposed charter text. Do you want to go at?
Yeah, should we read it out loud? What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's too not.
All right. So the autonomic networking, closer. The autonomic networking integrated model and approach working group develops and maintains specifications and documentation for interoperable protocols and procedures for automated network management and control of networks that are developed, built, and operated by professionals. That was basically, as a reminder, that part to separate from, for example, HomeNet. The vision is a network that configures, heals, optimizes, and protects itself. The strategy is the incremental introduction of components to smoothly evolve existing and new networks accordingly. Anima work will rely on the framework described in draft IETF Anima reference model. Work not related to this framework is welcome for review, but working group adoption of such work requires explicit rechartering. The three areas of the framework are, first, the autonomic networking infrastructure, second, autonomic functions built from software modules called autonomic service agents, and third, intent. And by the way, let me just quickly see if I can, because I did, Laurent's change. Is this the one? What? Is this? No, this is, wait a second. This is the one. Put this in here. No, I mean, it was good feedback, so. No? Good. Please come.
There's some mouse pointer. That's on that one.
Yeah.
So that's protected from.
Right. The ANI is specified through prior Anima work. It is composed of the autonomic control plane, bootstrap over secure key infrastructure, including vouchers, and the generic autonomic signaling protocol. Anima will work on closing gaps and extending ANI and its components. Anima will start to define autonomic functions to enable service automation in networks. It will also work on generic aspects of ASA, including design guidelines and lifecycle management, including coordination and dependency management. Anima will not work on intent or machine learning and other AI techniques without explicit rechartering. Anima will coordinate with other IETF and IRTF groups, including NMRG for intent. So this was basically my proposed lightening up the expectation against you, poor working group chair of NMRG, if that's the right way to phrase it. Okay, cool. Acceptance of work items by the working group will be scheduled throttled so that contributors can target them to enter working group last call after not more than 4 IETF meeting cycles. So that was basically, what we felt was maybe useful to write down, because we had really a first round where there was a little bit of trouble of creating really very big and all mutually dependent documents, resulting in this kind of cluster that we're still trying to finish off. Proposed work items include, but are not limited to, and this is the last slide, works extending ANI, including variations of ANI deployment, such as virtualization or compounding environments, information and signaling distribution within an autonomic network, ANI OAMP interfaces, management, provisioning, and so on, interactions with Yang-based mechanisms, defining the domain boundaries and membership management of the domain. Works regarding to generic autonomic service agents, including design and implementer guidelines for ASA, lifecycle management, authorization and coordination of ASA. Brewski relevant work, including proxies, enrollment, adaptations over various network protocols, variation of voucher formats, generic use case of autonomic network and new grasp extension options for them, including but not limited to bulk transfer, DNS-SD interworking, autonomic resource management, SLA insurance, multi-tenant management, and network measurement. And then last point, integration with network operation centers, including autonomic discovery connectivity to NOC, Yang-based ASA management by the NOC, and reporting and reporting, I think that should be, there is a bug, reporting and management, AF from node to NOC. So this obviously, is a 10-year plan, and the only reason why I think we had the wide scope is because we had, in each of these areas, interesting work proposals made, but that doesn't mean that we would kind of blindly go forward and kind of accept all of these drafts at the same point in time, and then basically, have another big chunk of drafts going out and waiting multiple years. So the missing piece that we have, and I think that's also expected not only in the data tracker, where milestones are of course tracked, but also for ISG review in the charter itself, would then be last sections with a few proposed milestones, where we're hoping that we'll find a good subset of documents that all have, a separate, main editor to take on the work, and who can take the responsibility of, bringing these drafts to fruition in reasonable time. The ones that we had, I think, well established, the ASA lifecycle from Laurent, Oh, okay. Sorry. The ASI guidelines, GRASP distribution, and the constraint join proxy. So those were the ones that came immediately to mind, but I think that's part of the discussion. And then I think the whole Brewski set of items, I think we'll hopefully still have time later on today to figure out, what we might want to put as candidate first milestones. Obviously, anything that is rather new. We hadn't even, checked with the working group how much they like it, right? Obviously, adopting something as working group is not only that it's in charter, but also that the working group approves of the document to be adopted, right? So those are the two steps we need to do. So this is basically the slide deck. Any comments on the charter?
Hi, Torlis and Chang. First, thanks very much for your hard work on the charter. This is Elliot Lear again. I think the charter looks pretty good. A couple of comments about Brewski, and also I think the last line in the charter text about gating work. I see the desire to implement class-based QoS in the draft queue, which I think is interesting. We have to, I think, be a little careful of head-of-line blocking in this. From the Brewski perspective, and Michael might want to comment on this a little bit, and I know that Stefan and Thomas might also want to comment. I see that there are quite a number of drafts, as you do too. My view is that we should probably take some time in tomorrow's IoT onboarding session to see if we can spend just a little bit of time mapping all the work, so that we can organize a little bit around the principle that you're following here in terms of how work is delivered. I would only ask that you not be too firm in terms of how many drafts you're taking on, just to avoid the head-of-line blocking, but also I do think this allows for a certain amount of discipline in terms of making sure the works are at least somewhat baked in order to be adopted. Now, I say somewhat baked because I don't think as a working group you want them fully baked when they come to you. You want to have at least maybe an implementation to test against, but you don't really, you want to have the opportunity for change rather than having people interoperability test before you even adopt the work. So with that caveat in mind, my suggestion in terms of filling in the blank for Brewski is this is something that I don't think you're going to be able to solve in this meeting today. I think it's probably something we need to talk about tomorrow and then take to the mailing list once we've had the discussion tomorrow. Is that okay with everyone? Does everybody know about the side meeting tomorrow? It's 2 o'clock, and it's on, I don't remember the name of the room, but it's in the 104 side meetings wiki, and everybody is welcome. There's plenty of room. In fact, there's more room than there is in this room, I think.
Yeah. Actually, we fully noticed that there's a bunch of the Brewski documents newly submitted. But there's two things we want to make sure. One is for now, the Brewski still not fully completed. I mean, the main draft. We would like the working group, particularly those risky, relevant people, to review that draft and, if possible, to contribute to that draft. Iterate it to be completed as soon as possible. Then, that's the time we can discuss how many draft we can follow up. What just now Terry's present there is, what we set up for the initial milestones. And obviously we don't want to show our ISG. We try to boil the ocean at the very beginning. But after we get our new charter approved, we could have the more flexibility, during the working group procedure, if there's enough energy and enough, quality work to guarantee our, working group output, then we can do more work. That's fine. Yeah? No?
Yes. Can you bring back Laurent Chavalia? Can you bring back the charter on the screen, please? I have some comments, essentially for clarification. I think at the beginning you mentioned work on protocols and procedures. Is it a bit too, constraining that nothing else except protocols or procedure can be the outcome of the working group? But maybe this is something we can improve. Can you go at the beginning of the text, please? Yes. Yeah. So, in the in the sentence you mentioned interoperable protocols and procedures. So, if this is the only type of outcome, or if we can think about other things such as mechanisms, or I'm not fan of architecture or framework, but maybe sometime we will need other types of output. So just don't make the charter too constraining on that. Mm-hmm. If you go to the next page, please.
So, just as a comment, right? This was a little bit written in fear of the same type of discussion of useless documents as perceived by, at least, ISGs we've seen in the past, where useless includes architectures, use cases, requirements, which I don't agree with, but I think we should have, if we do anything like that, that doesn't, focus on interoperable aspects, then I think we need some strong evidence that these are useful as far as the working group sees it.
Yeah, I understand the where it comes from and the constraint, but just mapping, for instance, to the ASA lifecycle draft or work, is it? I'm not sure it will be a protocol. Not sure we can call it a procedure. So you see, I don't see really the mapping here. I can live with that and just.
I think procedures, right? I think the life cycle I'd account under procedures.
Yeah, but life cycle can also rely on the model and some mechanism inside. So, okay, maybe.
Do you want to propose explicit text? I think because especially now that I can't.
Yeah, maybe
notes.
I can send something offline to proposal. Yeah. Second page, please. On the next page. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just on the second bullet point, just for clarification, you mentioned lifecycle management, including coordination and dependency management. Mm-hmm. Is it clear what dependency means here? Because I don't understand what dependency to what.
Wasn't that the term that I was hoping I was using the term that you were using in one of the drafts that you were showing, which was, the dependency graphs of the different ASAs.
I'm not using the term in the same meaning, I think. If we think about dependable components or...
No, dependency graph, right? So the dependency graph between the different components so that you can resolve...
Maybe we can, I can make a suggestion. I think it might be misunderstood or misleading.
Sure.
Here.
If you have a better term for that, I hope, but I hope you now know what I was referring to.
I know, but
okay. Please suggest better.
Okay, then next, please. Not the last bullet, just the one before. You mentioned generic use cases. I don't know exactly what is a generic use case. For me, use case is a use case. It's very difficult to make something generic out of a use case. My question is more like, I mean, if we want to go into some use cases, we have to clarify what will be the output expected by the working group. To come back to my first comment, if we have protocols and interoperability protocols and procedures, what's the expected outcome or form of the outcome of that can go from the use cases? Again, just a comment. Maybe we don't need to. And you mentioned autonomic SLA assurance. Just for the record, there was in energy. One of the initial UCAN both use cases was published as an RFC last year on autonomic SLA violations. So this can be either an extension or needs to be clarified exactly if the same thing or not.
So I couldn't take good notes of that. So if you have specific suggestions for the text, I think that would be even better than us trying to convert your thoughts into text.
Offline. Can you go to the last? I'm not sure I have something. But,
no, that was just.
Yeah, that was okay. Thank you.
Ignas Bagdonas. While we are on a Bruski topic, so where would you see and how would you see fitting in the more details the various variations and extensions and what I would use the word profiles for the Bruski, which were initially targeted at above, which didn't materialize, and now it is kind of self-organizing in the side meetings. How much of that you see as a maintenance, and how much of that is a rather essential work, which can possibly be separate? And the reason for asking that, if you talk about 4 cycles, for me, this Bruski derivative work, I really hardly see how that can fit into 4 cycles. That's much more than 4 cycles.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, one of the interesting challenges. The 4 cycles was just some stake in the ground that we put in there, and we can remove it, right? So I mean, I think we were just trying to show to the ISG that we're trying, as good as possible, to ensure that we've got more timely delivery than what we were able to do in Charter Round 1. So I think that obviously the way we would handle this is that for each individual draft that we accept, we would say, how long do you think it takes to get into last call? And when this is more than 4 cycles, I think what we would do is basically ask our AD at that point in time if that's acceptable, right? Because ultimately it's the AD who wants to see the timeliness of delivery of work from the working group. And, if you right now as an AD already see that specific work items will take longer to finish, then it's a value judgment that should be done anyhow, right? The whole point was just to basically ensure that the working group, without, asking the AD, doesn't take on, things where we can't even predict how long they take.
I do understand that from your side. However, there might be work that is both important and not necessarily directly Bruski as such derivative. Well, call it Bruski derivative. So the question is, where's the ride home? Is that Anima or is that something else? And I don't expect an answer from you. This is an open question, basically.
Okay, so Elliot again. I think the issue here that you're hitting on, Ignas, is meeting time, like in this room. And like if we monopolize the meeting time with Bruski, then other work doesn't get done. Or vice versa, if there's so much work, other work that's happening, then Bruski gets starved for time in the room. That's one issue. And that can be solved, I believe, by there are 2 ways you can solve that. The first is you can split off the Bruski work into another working group. You always do that. The second is that we can use other means for communicating, like having interim meetings, either virtual or real. I think the hackathon work that Michael's doing is really excellent, along with the guys from Siemens and NXP and others. I think that's all good stuff. So we can leverage all those means of communication. But I think it is a cautionary point to take into account that if we do see one or the other aspects of the animal work starved, then I think we do need to start thinking about splitting off. My personal expectation is a little premature to do that, but I would actually be in the hands of the chairs in terms of their view and their experience as to how this has played out.
So we had a lot of IETFs where we had simply 2 meeting slots, right? And if we see that the work amount that we have, and there are a lot of working groups that have a lot more time during the week than just, this amount of working slots. So as soon as we see that we have enough, work items or items we would like to discuss to adopt, I think that's the most easy starting point, even before going into any of the more difficult. Interim obviously is always a good thing, and that can be as much self-organized as you want it to. And we as working group chairs are always very happy to, support it through all the, things like WebEx passwords that we have and whatever, we can help to make that happen. So. Does anybody know how to re-enable mirroring mode on Chrome OS? Yeah, it didn't work. So now we have an issue. It said exiting mirror mode 9 minutes ago, and I don't know how to.
What happened is the projector power saved, and then that
Then just use our machine to do the test. Use mine. Oh no, I don't. Yes, I do.
You want to sit here then? Which side is it on?
Yeah, this side. Should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
But you need to track the time. Okay. Okay, so she.
Okay.
Okay. It's fine.
How can I lower this?
Okay. Okay. But how much time do I have now?
As little as you can.
As little as I can. Okay. Okay, I'll try that. So, here's Jun Xiao. I'm from Huawei, but all the other authors are not here except Shen. So this is just a short update for the information distribution in the autonomic networking. This is the -10 version. So next page. So I don't think everybody here fully read our document here. So if you don't read the document, here's a very good picture to show what it is and what do we want to do. So we have the higher layer, autonomic service agent to do lots of automation of the network. We also have the lower layer infrastructure, autonomic networking infrastructure, to provide us the infrastructure to transport our things. But what is missing in our observation is that we need to transfer information from one node to another node. So here's our target. We want to define how the information can be done over the autonomic network infrastructure, and especially for not only for the synchronous communication, but also for the asynchronous communication. Okay, next page. Since IETF 102, what we updated the working group, not the working group, the individual draft is that we added operations and procedures for the distributed storage, and in the latest update, we also added the operation and procedure for the event queue submodule. Okay, next page. Here's just some very detailed things about how this information can be put in our network and can be reused later when the information is wanted. So this page illustrates that how the information can be put in a best effort way in our network. So here I basically repeat what we wrote in our draft, the main seven steps to finish the information put operations from one Anima node to another Anima node. I will not go to the detail of every step here, but I would like to emphasize one thing is that the Grasp API part is empty here. We, of course, need to map all the 7 main steps to our Grasp APIs in our future work. Next page, please. And here, this page shows how to get the information back, which we actually stored in the network before. I also don't want to go to the details of the every step. Also, we will try to define the APIs for the Grasp protocol in our future work and how to map the 7 steps to our Grasp protocol specification. Okay, this is about the information put and get from our last update. Okay, next page. This page is about our latest update. Once we have put our information in our network, and how could we really notify the upper layer ASA to see that, oh, there is such a information is ready. If you really want, if you are really interested in such information, how could I notify the other node and services? So here we have 5 main steps to do, and we also will map the 5 main steps to our Grasp specification in our future work. So basically, in these 2 updates from IETF 3 and 4, what we did is that we put some very basic operations procedures to how to store the information in our network, and later on can be published by the Anima node and serve the other node. Okay, next page, please. In our future work, of course, this basic operation procedures are not enough, of course. We really have more complicated communication modes that has to be done for the information distribution module. So that's why in our future work, we will further complete the procedure for the information distribution. And also another very important part is that we want to also map all the operations procedures to our Grasp protocol, so that we don't need to create any new set of protocols. We just basically reviews what we have proposed in this working group. Okay, next page. Okay, since this draft is mainly about the how to use the Grasp for the information distribution in the Anima network, and it's also kind of one of the milestones. So we are thinking about, because the work is also gradually approached to the very detailed specification stage. So we are thinking about whether or not it should be adopted by the working group, so that we can get, more speed and power and motion to deliver this work. Of course, we really need the comments and comments, reviews and suggestions from the whole working group. Although we didn't receive any kind of rejection from the working group, but we also didn't receive any concrete comments from the working group. So we actually encourage the whole working group to really review and seriously review our document, even put questions, put problems to us, so that we can really improve the work. Okay, thank you. Thank you. The chairs won't, co-adoption for this meeting, because actually here you say one of the milestone is misread, because that's just our proposals for the new charter. So maybe next time. Yeah, sure. I'm not, and we do encourage the working group participant to read this draft. Of course. As we said, it's actually the extending of the Grasp protocols. So it's in the current charter. also should be in the proposed new charter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
No.
He's tried to change.
I read the documentation. The documentation for Chrome OS was wrong, so I think I can give up.
Okay, but you create an issue for next working group chair sitting here.
Yeah.
Next session.
Yeah. I think we can read.
There's an actual problem.
Yeah.
Like you can tell the secretary that you're having this problem.
Okay, so we have the exciting Brusky, and actually we are now almost 20 minutes late, and I'm decided to cut off the last individual draft, so we're just 10 minutes late. So you can almost.
I will try to hurry up anyway.
Yeah.
Document status on Brusky. So Max and I have met almost every Tuesday, and sometimes Tuesdays and Thursdays since the last IETF for 2 or 3 hours. You saw the list of tickets, there are about 63 of them. And next slide, please. We got them all closed. We had two large reviews that happened just before IETF 103, and one that arrived sort of just at the after it, which was from the Russ Housley. And he may know him more as a security guy than an IoT guy. So there's lots of overlap. And we put out the 18, I guess, in January-ish with kind of keep people aware so people could, maybe get closer to getting the changes understood. And 19 was sent out just on the 9th or something like that. Next slide, please. So those links go to, if you want to read all the reviews, if you want to see all the stuff, there's the diff, and I posted the message. If you want to see the issues, they're there. In most cases, the issues, the text that fixed the issues is visible as in GitHub as the commit that fixes it. There's one or two where, we screwed up and didn't put the number in, or there's one or two where you may see some text, some two or three fixes in one thing, but mostly it's just there. New sections that were added, particularly we had an applicability statement to make it clear that when Brusky is applied in the ACP context, what you need to do. We had a lot of statements like that spread throughout the document. We mostly left them there, and then we also collected them into one place. We added a large, I think it's 3 or 4 page privacy consideration section. It deals with stuff that is revealed either by Brusky during the protocol or is revealed to the manufacturer by running the protocol. So there's some things that an observer, a passive observer by eavesdropping can see things. So if you use TLS 1.2, for instance, they can see your IDEV ID going across the wire, which means they know who issued it, they know what your serial number is and stuff like that. In TLS 1.2, that's just the reality for certificates over the wire. Not a lot we can do about that. In TLS 1.3, it does crypto, then authentication with certificates, so that's really good if you use TLS 1.3, but we don't mandate 1.3, we mandate TLS, use good TLS. So as people switch to 1.3, that's good. But then there are things that you would reveal to the manufacturer anyway, and you need to because you're going to get a voucher back, and there's things like that. The vouchers are never visible to passive observers, but clearly are visible to the manufacturer that created them, the registrar that processes them, and this kind of stuff. And we don't consider that really a privacy violation. That's part of the feature. There were a lot of discussions and long threads about how can the manufacturer keep you from selling your used equipment and things like that. And we have a section on this. It was originally called gray market equipment, and I think it's now been split up into a couple different pieces there. And there's things, for instance, where I live in Canada, some equipment is cheaper if you buy it in the US. So you buy it in the US, you ship it to the thing, you drive across the border, you pick it up, you do it, and then you call support, and they're like, no, I'm sorry, but your gateway laptop is not supported when you call from Canada, right? It's a common occurrence in a lot of markets where it's called gray market. It's not that you stole it, it's just it's not supported in your market where you are running it. And so that's the kind of thing that could happen. And Brewski essentially automates the manufacturer learning about you doing this, right? Because your IP address, when you register it, is clearly not in the place where they thought you were running it. So is this a new problem? We say no. Have we made it automated? Yes. So, okay, you may have some opinions about that, right? But it's not something that fundamentally is different. And fundamentally, if you're running, you know, big piece of forwarding engine and you don't trust the manufacturer to provide you working firmware, then this is not a new problem. You already had to trust them for working firmware. So if that's your issue, that, you know, then I don't know, maybe you should be building a company that makes verifiable router firmware instead of worrying about this. Next slide, please. So there's been, as you said, there's been lots of people interested in doing Brewski. It was a surprise to me that the thread group has adopted it. We don't unfortunately have official liaison with the thread group. There are some people that are members of both. I've been trying to get some kind of formal process to go back and forth. And so I have to say, ask details from them because I actually don't know. Even though I'm working with people that do it, I don't actually know what they're doing that. A bunch of implementations have been out there. We actually came upstairs from our third in-person session where we're in a room. There's a couple of people here that are there doing that. I understand DOT's working group wants to use Brewski. I still don't quite understand the exact use case. I learned some things that are surprising me today in an email, but there you go. Next slide, please. I repeated the terminology slide in case you haven't seen it, because I think it's used to keep repeating it until you do it. I forgot to bring my rubber ducky, have it downstairs if you want to see one. Next slide, please. We considered and decided not to remove the unsigned pledge voucher request. Interoperability testing said that that was the easiest thing to do, and so it was a surprise to see it from certain places. When the pledge asks for a voucher, it may do so with an unsigned request. It's an option. The registrar always signs its request to the MASA, and the results are always signed and all the way can be verified all the way back to the pledge. Only time you don't forward the pledge's signed or unsigned voucher request to the MASA for sure is when their pledge is not turned on and you are doing an offline request. Peter, you're having problems, you're frowning and you're having problems seeing, or just, I'm just wondering because you're, yeah. Oh, there's something happening on the screen. Okay, I'm just wondering if it was misunderstanding, like there's words that are just wrong, or. Oh, and it went again. Oh, I stepped on a cable maybe. Okay. All right. So yeah, it's really fuzzy on my screen too. So there's something really up. So we don't actually, upon consideration, we realized that as I was trying to implement as well some things that there is no, if the pledge sends an unsigned request, that the only thing in that request that has any value at all is the nonce, and it needs to be sent by the MASA to the registrar to the MASA. And if you are asking for a nonceless voucher, in other words, one that doesn't expire, that's for a pledge that's offline, then obviously you don't even need to talk to the pledge. So then the question is, was there any value of ever supporting an unsigned voucher request? Okay, we feel like it almost has, there's no point at all to it, right? And we wrote it as a compromise, in the early days of the document, believing that this protocol would be useful to constrain devices that had to do a small amount of crypto. Well, if they're doing TLS or DTLS or ad hoc, and they're validating the voucher, whichever form it is, which is in CMS right now, so ASN1 as well, or in COSI, so it has to do some crypto anyway. So then the question is, for an online pledge, can we just get rid of this option? And The corollary is that we wrote that the constrained voucher document would only support unsigned voucher requests because we thought crypto was hard. And so I also think that we should remove one or the other in that case, and I think it should be the unsigned case. So I'd love to hear from the working group about this. And I think this might actually be the last slide other than my new slides. Yeah.
Hi, this is Kent. Michael, I'm sorry. Can you just be more clear about what is the decision? Because there's question. You're saying things and you're framing it as questions.
Yes.
And it's not really clear what it actually is.
The decision is, should unconstrained Brewski.
That's a question. That's a question.
Ask him for a recommendation.
All right.
His view.
What is your view?
What is? Oh, you want my view? Oh, I see. I believe that we should remove unsigned pledge requests from Brewski. I believe that constrained Brewski, which uses constrained vouchers, should always have signed pledge requests as well. I had a different view 6 months ago.
Okay, to restate that, the consensus or your thinking is that vouchers should always be signed.
Vouchers should always be signed. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yes. This is Elliot. So I agree. However, I think over time, the form of that signature may need to vary.
I totally agree. We can, we have CMS, we have COSI, we could have JWT if someone would like to have something between. We can have quantum, crypto, alien stuff doing whatever, mind melds. That's okay, as long as it's signed.
All right, Ignas Bogdanas. So what's next with this document? You mentioned your issues list. Is that completed now? I've done a AD review for version 17, which is quite radically different from what it is in 19.
Yeah.
Do you expect 20 be posted really soon and no major changes afterwards? Do you need more time? What's your steps?
The only issue is this one that we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. It involves deleting text, not adding any. Like 4 paragraphs or something. Okay. The diff from 17 to 19, which I did post that as in the message. It's not a trivial diff, yes, but it's actually, I thought it actually looked quite well. I found it went quite well to me to say, yes, there's not actually that many changes. The text that is changed is mostly in response to clarifications that people have asked for. There are no changes on the wire from these changes, the exception that we remove unsigned pledge requests. So from that point of view, anything or any thoughts that anyone have or any code that anyone's written is unchanged. I would suggest please start your review now. If the working group concludes on the mailing list that this is the good idea, then we'll cross that text out and post 20. But I don't have an intention to post 20 this week or next week until someone says that we have clear consensus to remove this.
Okay. So another point on this. Due to the amount of changes which went in since the last call, the version which was last called, this will have to be another last call.
Okay, fair enough.
So 20 anyway will have to materialize at some point of time, and probably 20 can be the last call version.
So, okay. So I would be very happy to do that if we do a 2-week last call, then, and the conclusion from this is to remove it, then let's remove it. And so we're going to get the cable fixed for those who are remote. That would be great. I did unicast the 3 reviewers with the updates. I'm going to pigeonhole some of them in the hallway tomorrow and make sure that they really saw the updates. I'd like their positive acknowledgement that they're okay with it. I mean, there's a lot of issues that were opened. So yeah, so great. We'll working group last call it again, I guess.
Okay.
I had another slide that I sent you guys, but I actually realized it repeats the slide. I forgot what's in my slides. You know, it repeats the slide about interoperability. We have had 3 Fair Hair Alliance interoperability sessions. The first was late November after IETF 103. The next was in Zurich at the beginning of February. And the third one is happening right now. And I think we're going to have, may have some more. They may or may not be on in person. We're trying to find some compromise between working remotely in weird time zones and being together for too long a time. That's it. So if you have code out there and want to participate, then doing it online is totally feasible, and I'd love to have more things doing that.
This constraint voucher?
Constrained voucher, yes. You ready? You got that's the right, it's not on my screen. Oh, there we go. All right, so next slide. So we adopted it last spring. The bulk of the document got finished last summer, fall. And then it got neglected to the point where it expired yesterday morning. Well, actually last week, but the system doesn't remove it till yesterday morning. Reposted yesterday. There are 4 or 5 comments on it from ESCO, one of which he noticed the voucher request example and voucher example were swapped, which is hard to see unless you look at the SID numbers. So the signed with COSI is new, not as well understood by implementers, and we're working on some better examples. That's it. Next slide. So we agreed essentially on the mailing list. I think there wasn't a lot of discussion back whether this was the constrained voucher document or the constrained voucher and constrained brewski document. It was unclear to me what we had agreed to do. The consensus was that it is going to include both. I believe that some of the brewski endpoints to be constrained are under specified in the document, so we need to include that a little bit more. We want to include examples that include the private keys so that you can run it through your software, validate that you get something identical to what we got, or at least close enough with given that ECDSA needs a random number. I will put the random number in too. We depended on the core working group's SID work, which translates YAML to CBOR using integers instead of strings. We saw at least in interoperability, we saw at least one implementer who translated the JSON to CBOR using strings. In other words, missing the whole constrained voucher point. And it was like, okay, that's not exactly what we said, but there you go. So at this point, the tooling to make the SID values out of the Yang document is unstable. You run at different versions on different people's computers, you get different numbers, okay? So that's an issue. So what we've actually done is we've said, okay, that's really nice. We've done it once. They're wired in. We don't expect them to necessarily be reproducible from the same process at this point. So that's unfortunate from a core working group point of view, but that's probably the best way for us. In general, that whole work needs something to do. We need to kind of send a message to the core working group to get your stuff done. Next slide, please. We need an allocation.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Let me worry you a little bit more.
Okay.
The Young specifications, the Young CBOR specification and SID specifications, which we actually are using, are now being discussed at core, and I hope that they agree about the document such that we'll go forward.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's better, slightly better news, I guess. Okay. So at this point, we've taken some allocations. They're allocated from a mega range. The idea was that IANA would give out to various, IANA being a fairly expensive allocation process for implementers, would give out ranges of 1 million numbers to other entities that would parcel them out in groups of 50. one of which was a reference implementation called comi.space, and they gave us those numbers that are shown there. So we're using the numbers. We don't know how to allocate them properly. And I guess this is something going to have to go back to the core working group, whether they're going to let us basically put our numbers in, or they're going to tell us, you lose, you're an internet draft, go back to scratch. Okay, so that could screw us up at least a little bit, because we'll have to fix code. And next slide. That I think is the last slide. Yes. Yes, there we go. That was the major issue. So that's going to put a hiccup in getting the document, out spaces that dependency. On the Brewski dependency and that stuff, I noticed that CDDL is now in the RFC editor queue with Anima step as of yesterday. So we might actually unwedge those other documents by the end of the week, I think. So that might be good. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Peter. Keep it under 7 minutes.
Under. Oh, I was afraid that it would be above 7 minutes.
Under.
Okay. Next slide, please. We have Brewski, which has just been explained, uses HTTP and TLS.
Closer to micro.
Uses HTTP and TLS. We want to replace the circuit proxy, makes it adaptable to co-op and DTLS. Please go on. Oh no, it was based on an earlier draft which has been published and has become old about 3 years ago. Okay, so what we have a graphic explanation that we see the pledge, which has a local discussion with the circuit proxy in Brewski, and then discuss from circuit proxy on the global network to the domain register. What we want to do is replace this circuit proxy by the joint proxy. That's what's specified in this draft, such that you can talk with the pledge, link locally, and also global with the registrar by using co-op DTLS. So far? So we have two ways that we want to do that. There's a stateful and a stateless, like with the former draft by Kumar, where we have a stateful, where we have the pledge discussing with the joint proxy remembering the link local address of the pledge, and then doing the global discussion with the registrar. Registrar sends back a message, and then the joint proxy says, oh, I know where this has to go to, and recovers the address and sends it back to the pledge. The other one, so there is no, the DTLS encryption has used at the pledge and at the domain register side. The joint proxy is not involved at all and doesn't know what goes on. Yeah. The same one, oh please, the same one. Form, yeah. Sure. So we also have a stateless one where the pledge sends the link local to the joint proxy. The joint proxy doesn't store it, but makes a header in which the link local address is stored, and then sends it on to the domain register, which remembers that there is this other address, sends it back, where the joint proxy says, I know where to send it to. So these are the two ones we don't know. Both have been asked for, so the draft now actually specifies both ones. The current discussion is that when you send between the joint proxy and the domain register, what kind of format should you use to store the link local address? So you use a header and header placing. I had been thinking of doing it using the new co-op format, so used all in the payload. However, some of our implementers think that getting that's all changing the payload is much more complex than providing other header. I'm not convinced, so we are nicely discussing it. Yep. I have here a small overview to show that actually this fits in a whole series. We have the Brewski, which has been discussed before. We have the EST Co-op S, which is actually discussed and goes through working group, has gone through the working group last call in ACE, which tells you how to use co-op to do the EST processes between pledge and register. Then we have the voucher, which has been done here, which tells you how you get the confidence from the MASA, etc. And we have the constraint voucher, just discussed here, where we have some other formats, security formats, which are added, which uses the voucher. And then now we have the constraint joint proxy. I hope it can continue in Anima. We have to wait the discussion, which uses also Silbor. maybe use multi-part contents draft. We're not sure about this for the moment, and it extends with Brusky with the constraint join proxy and EST CoPass. So the whole thing nicely fits together. Yep. So we have to update the example payloads, the same which is true for the constraint voyagers. We have to improve the discovery text, which is a bit sparse compared to what should be expected. And we really hope for comments, which are really appreciated in this context. And major question, what about Anima here?
Well, just as an individual contributor, I think to review all these constraint documents, it would be good to understand, what the typical type of constraint devices are that the solution is targeting, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that context. So, because it's hard to, figure out the applicability without knowing what it's meant to be applied for. So, and I'm not sure if any of these drafts has a specific good section about that, or how would we deal with that type of
the draft tries to abstract from that, and it actually says, look here, the constraint devices use CoAP and DTLS. How can we handle that in the context of Brusky? I think that's the level at which the drafts. So we don't go any below. Say what is the 6-LoWPAN structure of the message? We do not do that. How large may the processor be? That depends on the implementation. So we are not. We don't discuss that. Okay. It's clear.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Thank you.
Answer your question. Yeah, answer your question. I mean, given there are so many work proposed relevant to Brusky proposed to Anima working group, and we propose to including those works in the next charter. But until we get that approved, still in there.
May I comment? It sounds like a lot of work, but much of the work done for the joint proxy is done in collaboration with the constraint voucher. Mm-hmm. So this actually goes together. If the constraint voucher examples can be made, they can be made for the constraint proxy. So there is a lot of synergy with those drafts. So it's not just an extra bunch of work. I mean, it nicely fits together. So if the workload is any consideration, I don't think you should bother too much with this.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for clarification. Okay. So next will be Michael.
Should turn my hat sideways a bit to change projects. So I've been working on a project involving doing IoT firewalling in home routers, and a certain amount of eventual IoT enrollment using Brusky and MUD files to provide the process of a lot of the security. And one of the things we want to do is not involve passwords ever on the home router for any of the moving parts. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Yeah. So that's the diagram. We have a video. You can see that's a smart toaster. It's got an iPad attached to it. We've done this talk, and you can see more about what we're doing if you want to go to those links. Next slide, please. So we have an app. It runs on the phone, talks API, does things about MUD. We want to authenticate it with a TLS client certificate. So we would like the phone to be enrolled into the registrar that is running on the SHG, the Secure Home Gateway. So effectively, we want what Brusky's and Anima's ACP wants for every node, which is a secure identity within the domain on each device. The catch is, next slide, please. Well, I got a lot of page numbers are broken on the bottom. Our interface is Tinder-like. You like the device, you don't like the device, you like it a lot, you hate it. So up, down, left, right, things like that. So up means it's a PC. Give it infinite access. Right means I like it, but use the MUD file. And left means get rid of that vacuum cleaner on my network. Okay. And down means it's broken. Please put it in quarantine. Next slide, please. So I've said this. Enroll a smartphone into a PK database in a registrar. Assumptions. The router has a QR code on a sticker attached. The smartphone has LTE connection or can walk around and find another Wi-Fi somewhere else. Okay. The router itself is probably the one that accesses your internet, and especially if it's PPPoE, DSL kind of stuff and some other things, it doesn't have any internet yet until you connect to it and tell it what's the password that you're supposed to use for the PPPoE. So no passwords in our system, but the ISP, of course, still wants one for PPPoE. As Stefan Friesen, the next thing we'll talk to you a little about his requirements, it might be that there is never any internet on that device. Next slide, please. So how do I do that? How am I going to do this? Not only do I need to enroll into a registrar, I need to enroll in a registrar for which I don't even own yet. Okay. So that's sort of the question. We're not just bootstrapping the phone, which would be a pledge, but we're bootstrapping the router, which in some sense has to be a pledge as well. So it's a kind of recursive application of Brewski. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. What we're proposing, in all-in-one step kind of thing, and there's another slide I'll show you there. Next slide, please. So smartphone is the client afterwards, and we want to do basically, once we have the connection established, we want to do an enrollment, simple EST enrollment, just like the end of Brewski. And we want to, then we'll have a connection and a pinned certificate in the router for the phone that says this is the administrator certificate and everything's good. Next slide, please. So first rev of this draft was called Smart Pledge because it's a smartphone and it was a pledge. And on discussions and explaining to people, they said, hey, this is really confusing because the devices keep changing roles. And so it's not the pledge anymore, so stop doing that. And then the other, Jacques Latour, suggested that Kaklink was the right word, and he says in his Gatineau French accent, and it sounds very much more rugged than I can do it. And then he provided the nice picture of the two glasses clinking, which if you can't visualize the sound, I hope you now can. We wrote the document, and we took the T out. I don't know why. It was a typo the first time, and I decided I would keep it that way. Smart Kaklink. Okay. Next slide, please. So one of the things is that the manufacturer still would like to maybe keep track of who the device was registered to from an abstract point of view, and might even want to further have the owner go through some kind of online registration process, right? So you go to register your new fancy washing machine, and they would like some details from you about who you are, where do you live, blah, blah, blah. Would you like service plan, this, whatever, okay? So there's an opportunity included in this to basically do an OAuth 2 process where you would sign up to the manufacturer or do the whole create new account or whatever it is. We're not getting involved with that, just saying, insert complicated stuff here. So that's why there's a transaction that turns out to be a little bit weird. Next slide, please. QR code. Well, we don't want to invent our own. The Wi-Fi Alliance released this device provisioning protocol, and it's really cool, and I'd love to just use it, but it uses 802.11 management frames, which I don't even know how to do from Linux with root right now, but I'm sure I can't do it from an app on an Android or iOS phone. Google or Apple will have to do this, provide APIs, and it's not clear to me that it's in their interest to do that. So I hope it'll happen true. EEP Noob does that. There's a lot of discussion on that yesterday in IMU, but I'm not really interested in building an AAA backend or a system like that for the home, and I'm not really interested in having the cloud do that. So I don't really know how to do that. So kind of didn't go with that. But all using QR codes. So I've stolen the DPP QR codes specifically in the hope that eventually some of protocol I'm describing will either be replaced with DPP or will facilitate an update to DPP, to become DPP. Next slide. So I said that. Next slide. So can I have a clicker? I'll have a clicker here. here. Yeah. Okay.
You can use the clicker, but it doesn't do anything. But if it makes you feel better.
Okay, because I want to control it. Goes next slide. So, so the first, the device is the pledge. I call it the adolescent registrar, meaning it hasn't grown up yet. Okay. Ooh, that's not the right one. There we go. You'll push the button for me. Middle button, eh? Okay. So don't. So the middle device is which would normally the registrar is the phone. Okay. Next. And we have a massa, and initially the router is the pledge with the duckling. Next slide. And the phone appears to be registrar-like. Good. Okay, next slide. So we scan the QR code. It tells us a bunch of information. Public key of the AR, some ESSID information, link local addresses of the thing, and the address of the massa. Next slide, please. So we generate a self-signed certificate, and next slide. We send it to the massa. We say, hey, I'd like to be introduced. It does some OAuth 2 stuff with if it's appropriate. Next slide, please. And it gives us back a certificate. A sophisticated massa would give us back a certificate and, that it really had done, and maybe it validated my name a lot and whatever. And the stupidest massa echoes back the self-signed certificate I gave it and says, yeah, I just used this. Okay, probably recording my public key in the middle. Okay, so I go on connect. The same kind of stuff, and I connect with the next slide, please, with an encrypted nonce that I send by ECIES which is a way of using encryption with ECDSA, to the public key that I got off the QR code. Send it there. The device decrypts that, which proves that he has possession of the private key, and sends me back. I asked for a voucher request. So normally the voucher request is posted to the registrar, but in this case, the registrar is asking, could you send me a voucher request? So he sends me a voucher request. The nonce is in the voucher request as an extension. The phone registrar can check it, make sure it's the right device, hasn't been spoofed on this open Wi-Fi network, and we send it to the massa as before. Next slide, please. We get a voucher back. Next slide. There's the voucher. And we send the voucher to the AR. The AR checks it using its trust anchors as exactly as before in Brewski. And we get a reply with the provisional state and telemetry, and we send the telemetry up. Next slide, please. So at that point, we now have established a trusted connection between the phone and the registrar. And now you'll see that the phone and the registrar have swapped places. The duck and the customs guy have stayed where they are. So now the phone is in fact the pledge, and the registrar is in fact running as a registrar, and he's grown up. He's no longer an adolescent. And we do an enrollment. We get a certificate, and that's basically it. And then we do something specific to configure the router, some APIs or whatever. But now phone has a TLS client certificate. The registrar has a IDEV ID. The two have trusted each other, and you can now do whatever it is you like to do with your new device. And next slide, please. I think that's last. We have some stuff. We delegate names to the router. We put an IDEV ID on it. We get a certificate under that name. We put the ULA of the router in the DNS so that everyone else can validate it correctly. And that's part of also what we're doing. Next slide, please. And it doesn't really belong in Anima. It doesn't belong in HomeNet. I don't know where to bring it, but please like me.
Yeah. Can we, for the matter of time, not do questions now? We just got less than 10 minutes, and we still want to do the. Yeah, excellent.
No. Sorry, use 4 more minutes.
Okay, Stefan Fries, Siemens. I try to be fast as well. So we have been involved in Brewski implementations. And what we figured out is that Brewski is applicable in synchronous scenarios, but not really in asynchronous scenarios. Asynchronous scenarios, next slide please, are scenarios where we might not have stringent network connection, so there might be temporary no online connectivity, either technically reasoned or by policy. In the second stage, there might also be not an on-site PKI functionality available. So this means that we have to store and forward certain information in the domain and then forward it later on to a PKI, which may reside in a backend. So that means if the domain itself doesn't feature something like a trusted component where we store the information from the initial authentication of the pledge, which has been done in the TLS link, in the EST link, or in the TLS link of the EST connection, then we run up in a problem when we forward that information further, so the certificate signing request to the PKI component that resides on the backend. Further on, there are use cases where we have multiple TCP hops. So that means we may have multiple TLS hops. And on the place where EST ends, typically the authentication ends. And you have no means of forwarding that authentication of the pledge further on to the place where the authorization decision for the certificate signing request is being made. So if we, next slide please, if we look at Brisky, oh, that's the old slide set, but that doesn't matter. Spare some time. So what we propose basically is to utilize self-contained objects for certificate request and certificate response to be able to store those messages either in the domain itself or to be able to process certificate signing request further on to a PKI that resides in a backend network. So as you can see here, I basically changed the picture a little bit. So you see that there is no PKI component in the domain network itself. So that means we store some information on the domain registrar and forward the certification request further to the PKI, which resides in the backend. What we assume here is that the PKI, so the registration authority, is responsible for doing the authorization of the certification action. So this is typically being done using an asset management system or an inventory management system, which also resides in the backend in most of the industrial applications. So that is the reason that we would like to support a self-contained object for certificate request and response messages to basically be able to do the authorization of the certificate signing request in the backend. Doing that in a self-contained way, we would basically do it in a similar way like we have the voucher exchange at the beginning. So the voucher is also self-contained, so we stick to the same model there. And it would also support in-band and out-of-band certificate request and response messages. So in-band means that we can use existing protocols like other industrial protocols that may basically piggyback the asynchronous or the self-contained certificate signing request object, or we can do it in a way like it is specified here in Brisky as such. So if we have the self-contained object, then we can also combine it with the voucher exchange itself. So this is a dotted line on the right-hand side. So we could glue basically the certificate signing request together with the voucher request and let it process by the backend actually under the assumption that the deployment domain itself doesn't have a direct connection to the internet and thus doesn't have a direct connection to the mother. Next slide. So the next step here would basically be to define or basically more outline the asynchronous certificate enrollment using the self-constrained objects. So that means we need to define the next steps, the self-constrained approach, come up with a Young model for that, which should be protocol agnostic. And that also means it should allow for using existing protocols. So there are already existing enrollment protocols that support self-containment. Some of them are ASN1 based, and Michael, I know you don't like that really, but anyway, it also leaves the option to come up with a different encoding scheme actually if we have a self-contained object for the certificate request response exchange. And we may think in a second step to couple the certificate exchange with the voucher exchange. And the question would be, is the working group interested in that work?
We'll raise that question on the list.
Yeah.
We still have one more.
One presenter, two presentations. Can talk, if that's correctly. Elliot?
Subtitle goes here.
I feel blue.
Yeah, it's your blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any? There's no. Okay. Can you hear me? Next slide. All right. This is basically a quick overview of how we're planning to do Brewski with wireless. This is only part of the problem, but here's your average Brewski flow. You've all grown to know and love. And you'll notice that at the front here, you have something like Discovery with MDNS that could just as well have been GRASP. Initiate TLS with HTTPS could have just as well been EST over CoAP. Problem is, you need an IP address for any of that stuff. You need to have L2 connectivity for any of that stuff. Well, that's a problem in 802.11. Next slide, please. This is just the next phase. Keep going. So what we've done is we've taken both Brewski and ESD and crammed it into an EAP method. And by cramming it into an EAP method, you now have a means to communicate with at least with the registrar and through the registrar of the MASA, and you're doing this through EAP-OL 802.11 frames. Isn't that nice? And you can use EAP for other things, which is also nice. Okay, next slide, please. So we got a lot of stuff to address. Something really happened to the fonts here. That's all broken. Let's see here. We don't. There are a couple of errors in the current draft in terms of the flow. Section 6, I think, has it right. Section 3 has it wrong. So the way we have to fix this is to code, and which is what we're going to do in the next couple of months. We also want to incorporate the work that Stefan just talked about because we think that's important. Which I call the, if you go back to Jerry Seinfeld episodes, there was the soup Nazi, and I call this the no soup for you, come back in 2 days option, so you can handle asynchrony. And we need to address the offline use case as well, which I'm not quite sure is perfectly solved by what Michael just presented, and we need to really actually delve into that. And we still have a SID selection problem, which we need to tackle. That is primarily a problem when you have 2,000 of these things in the center of Tokyo. So it could be something that we can solve, in a phased manner. That is to say, we may not have to solve this immediately, but it's something that we probably do need to take on. And when it comes to Brewski, particularly with the online methods, this 2,000 SID problem becomes a royal pain in the butt. Next slide. That's it.
Okay.
How's that?
There was a second one. Was there a second one, Brewski? Is it both together? Okay. All right.
Questions?
Okay. No, so I think definitely, I think the most important part, please folks, request a lot of time for these new things next time around so that we really make sure that we do get, either, 3 hour or 2 hour sessions, right? That we can actually spend good time on getting these enough review and discussion in the room so that we can have a better adoption call, because right now we can't adopt anyhow because we're still trying to finish up on the charter, but next time around hopefully that would be a really good time to have long discussions and we'll get more time. Yeah.
Okay.
So that just to respond to that really quickly, this work was not ready for adoption. It isn't ready for adoption. It was shown to EMU as well. And so one of the organizational discussions is does that belong in EMU? Does it belong in here? And that is a matter of where we need the experts, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. So hopefully we will have our new charter approved before next IETF meeting. Then we are in better position to serve the community. So I declare to close this session and see all you guys in Montreal. Right. Okay. Thank you. But that has to be after recharge.
Level 2 technician returns.
Yeah.